Hey, what's up guys? I'm Jared Poirier and welcome to my movie review show where I talk about movies. Thank you guys so much for joining me once again on the Movie Nerd channel. And today I decided to make a video because a movie came out that I thought I would be really excited for, and when it finally dropped, I was really kind of meh in my approach to the entire thing. And of course, I am talking about John Wick 3. And I'm someone that likes a good action movie, The Raid, Predator. I can even get behind some of the Bourne films. So I should be really excited for John Wick 3. And I haven't rushed out to the theater to see it yet. And I was wondering why it is that I'm not super excited for this film or super excited for a lot of action films in general. And I came to the conclusion that that is probably because we now live in an era where basically audiences are going to the cinema in order to see stunts. We're living in like the era of the Evel Knievel. And let me tell you guys what I mean by that. So I actually think that there has been a trend in cinema recently towards people going to the theater just to see the stunts. There are three franchises that I'm going to talk about here that really illustrate my point. The first one is going to be the obviously John Wick franchise. The second is going to be the Mission Impossible franchise. And the third, perhaps most egregious example of what I'm talking about here would be the Resident Evil franchise. So my overall theory here is that there's been a trend towards basically stunt junkieism in the viewers of movies. And I actually think that this has hurt the narrative aspects of films. People have been focusing way too much on the stunts and not focusing enough on the story, and that's the problem. So let's start with one of the most stunt-dependent franchises in history, which is the Mission Impossible franchise. And don't get me wrong, I do like these movies, but I think that this franchise illustrates my point perfectly. Can you tell me stunts from this franchise? Of course you can, even if you don't know the name. The Burj Khalifa, I think it's called, is like the huge building that Tom Cruise scales. You can talk about him hanging on to the airplane. I think that's in Rogue Nation if I'm not wrong. All of these different stunts, the helicopter stunt in the new film. I mean, when someone asks, hey, did you go and see the new Tom Cruise film, the new Mission Impossible film, they're going to be talking about the stunts. Can you please tell me like a through line of story? Can anybody even supply me with that? You probably can't unless you're a huge fan of this franchise, and that's because these movies are all about the stunts. People are going to the cinema to see what the next crazy thing that Tom Cruise is going to do, and they're not going to the cinema to see an engrossing story, and I think that's why these films fail to really have a lasting impact on people. The next franchise that we're going to get into here, probably time that we talk about the Resident Evil franchise. And I think that this series of films is terrible in a lot of ways, but especially if we're talking about narrative, especially if we're talking about stories. Again, if I were to ask you what is the ongoing story in Resident Evil, I don't think that you would be able to do it. Something about T-virus and zombies, and beyond that, I don't think you could really tell me what the story is. And they've had, I don't even know how many of those films, 4 or 5 or something, and you know, they could have done so much with that. There's so much room there to tell an engrossing story, but people are just going there to see Mia Jovovich, Koshevich shake her titties around in her ass and be in skimpy costumes. They're not going for a story that's going to impact them. And that's the next thing that we're going to talk about here. The film that this entire video is supposed to be about, and that is John Wick 3. So I saw the first John Wick movie, thought it was cool, lots of good stunts. Saw the second John Wick movie, thought it was cool, lots of good stunts. Does the story really have me drawn in? Do I really care about any characters? Nope. And that's probably why I don't care really about seeing John Wick 3. The only reason that anyone would see it is for the stunts. And I know that you're gonna have just the, you know, architecture, you know, the bare bones of a story there, but the people who make these types of movies, they know the people who are going to see them don't really care about the story. They're just going to see them so that they can talk about the stunts with their friends, and quite frankly, I think this is hurting cinema. I think that all of these films could be a lot better if they focused more on the story, if they focused more on the narrative aspect, less on the action and less on the stunts, even though they are action films. Some of the greatest action films in history are those films that actually have themes, actually have a story. So we're going to talk about 3 films that actually blend action and narrative together, and they use action to suit the narrative. The narrative should be the most important thing. A film is telling a story. A film isn't a series of action scenes. Okay, so first we're going to talk about The Dark Knight, because people, I guess, just haven't talked enough about The Dark Knight on YouTube, but I think that this film is a perfect example of using action, having great action scenes. Well, the hand-to-hand combat's kind of crap, but there are some scenes of action that really emphasize the scale of this movie, that really tell you that this is something important, something that you should be paying attention to. And it does display something that engrosses the viewer and can keep them really engaged in a way that some of these other films, these other action franchises aren't able to do. And that's why films like The Dark Knight have had such a lasting impact. Another film that I'm gonna mention, one that has obviously been talked about a lot on YouTube, but that's because it is such a great movie and such a perfect example of the action scenes in a film suiting the story. And we are, of course, talking about Mad Max Fury Road. And that's a movie with tons of action scenes, tons of great action, a movie where people do talk a lot about the practical effects, but I think overall the reason why that film has had so much staying power is because of the story and because of how the action scenes suit the story. They're always elevating things, they're always like amping up the pressure, putting pressure on our main characters so that they have to really show their stuff. And that's why I love films like Mad Max Fury Road. Man, that was a lot of talking. I really need some water.
Wow, that sounds pretty friggin' disgusting when you have a lapel mic on.
Okay, so the last film that I'm going to talk about here, I am really excited to talk about because it illustrates my point friggin' perfectly, and that is Baby Driver. And of course, Kevin Spacey being a pedophile has kind of ruined my enjoyment of this film, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't illustrate my point really well. So in Baby Driver, we actually have action scenes that are showing us a lot about our character of Baby. When he has to take on these action scenes, it's often very reluctantly. He doesn't really want to do these car chases and stuff like that. And the way that things play out, I don't want to spoil too much about that movie in case people haven't seen it, but it really shows his characteristics, really shows who he is as a character and what he wants. Like with Mad Max Fury Road, the action scenes really put our characters to the test and show what they're made of. And with Baby Driver, just like in The Dark Knight, the story and themes are ultimately served by the action and not the other way around. Okay, so I think that I've made my point. I can probably stop rambling on about action movies now. But before I go, I'll leave you with this little bit of advice. Until audiences, and that's us, start caring more about story than action, the producers of films aren't going to. So if you're going to the movie theater to see some movies every year, make sure that they're not just like Avengers movies and Fast and the Furious. Make sure that you're going into some of those smaller films, some more narrative-driven films, and giving them some support. Okay, so that's probably gonna be a long enough video. I'm gonna go barbecue some meat. I love you guys, and I will see you guys next time.